Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Normal Sociopathy Under Capitalism and in Capitalist Democracies. So, in an earlier video, I was talking about how the GOP and Trump are normalizing criminal sociopathy. So, I was making a distinction between criminal and what I'm calling here normal sociopathy. And criminal sociopathy is a generalized sociopathy that is, you could say, in psychological terms, characterological. So extending throughout someone's personality, so forth and so on. And from a sociological perspective, that can be expressed in almost any area of a person's life, in any role that they assume, so that the person is impulsive and out of control can be impulsive and out of control in almost any circumstance that they find themselves in. They might be able to reserve for a time being a certain area of their life from their impulsive, self-seeking, rule breaking and also rights undermining. In other words, undermining the rights, the welfare of other people for their own good. They may be able to contain themselves temporarily or in certain circumstances in order to focus on another area where they fully give in to their impulsiveness and egocentric desire for any number of different things that they're looking for or things that they want, be it money, power, or sex, or attention, or whatever it is that they're looking for, and going in some sense, running roughshod over other people, and in that pursuit, and so. So there's a more common form of sociopathy, which I'm calling normal sociopathy under capitalism, and it might also pre-exist capitalism in different forms. So I'm not saying capitalism invented this form of sociopathy, but it's a form of sociopathy that can be quote unquote functional in certain areas of the capitalist economy, and also in the capitalist democracies or the politics that one finds often in a capitalist system. So, or certainly in a more unconstrained capitalist system. So anyway, what I'm saying is that there is the idea that capitalists externalize costs on society, on workers, and on the world, on the natural world from which they have extracted various useful elements or biological things, by crops or wood, or basically biomass, you could say, for any number of different uses, for obviously for food and so forth and so on, and feed for cattle and anyway, so that process involves an externalization of cost on other people and on the world and on other, on the biosphere, on ecosystems more generally. And so, and we come to a crisis, or there's, a number of crises going on at the same time, but some of the most acute crises are the crises of the climate and also of species diversity, and which are all sort of, flowing together in different forms. So anyway, capitalism normalizes this externalization. It is normal for someone leading a business or leading or managing a business to seek to externalize those costs on the workers and on the community in which the enterprise operates, or communities around the world where they get their supplies from, and by trying to pay the lowest possible price for their inputs into their production, they hope to maximize their profits. And in the financial markets or in asset trades, they hope to externalize their cost, or to pay the lowest possible cost for whatever asset, and then sell it at the highest possible cost. So, and that process, in some sense, insulates them from this more physical or interpersonal even aspect of capitalist, sort of the real economy, so to speak, of capitalism. And then there's also the financialized economy that attempts to abstract from the production process and from the service providing process to trade assets, and attempt to extract, to further to intensify the process of externalizing costs. And so anyway, now there are some businesses and some capitalists and some organizations that can afford to, or that attempt to minimize this process of externalizing costs, and attempt to create, people who or companies that form as B corporations, or as some other an ethical, ethically mandated organization that does certain business types of business, so on and so on, and they could potentially survive in a capitalist market doing that, depending on what their competition is, and so forth and so on. But anyway, the vast majority of enterprises, and the ones that control the commanding heights of any number of different sectors of our economy, are about minimizing costs and maximizing profits, and externalizing the difference, in other words, and creating, this what I'm calling a sociopathic relationship to the world, and to their own workers, and their own, and so this is what I'm calling normal sociopathy. So it's normal sociopathy in the sense that there's a compartmentalization, often, not necessarily always, and there are people who run these companies, and it tends to intensify and become a more generalized sociopathy. And this is where you can see, in a way, Donald Trump, who is likely, completely sociopathic in his entire life, in all different sectors of his life. He certainly he delivers every day evidence to that, as well as even more severe, or as severe aspect, personality or mental disturbances in other areas of his life, or in other sectors of what one could talk about as mental health overall, not just in the area of interpersonal relationships, personality, which is sociopathy, but also things like, delusions, illusions, so forth and so on, formal thought disorders, all that kind of thing. I'm not doing a whole number on that, but in any case, putting aside Trump for the time being here, you have, though, a society where you have people who are able to compartmentalize what I'm calling their normal sociopathy within a certain sector of their lives, and then they go to another sector of their life, and they attempt to protect that sector from the ravages. In other words, the dirtiness of the market, the dirtiness of their business, and it's either their home, or it could be their religious community. Again, it's not clear cut. It's not a perfect solution by any stretch of imagination. That vertical separation between one role and the other role can, one thing bleeds into another. So I'm not saying there's a stable solution in that, but in any case, you have people who have, for instance, Andrew Carnegie, who, exploited his workers and, made a fortune, and also, damaged the environment of, where his, steel plants and so forth and so on, his industries flourished, but he used some of his gains, his financial gains, to finance libraries and other public institutions. And so you have the phenomenon of philanthropy, where you have people who attempt in their other parts of their life. Now, some of it is also with tax exempt status. It's partly, or some of it is also self-interested. In other words, to minimize tax, liability, to donate to these various nonprofits and so forth and so on. So you have that phenomenon that seems to be noble and seems to be socially minded, but isn't entirely, let's say, is only partially that. And you have people who live more or less in one or the other areas. And anyway, also in politics, so capitalists in the 19th century and in the early 19th century attempted to establish their own political legitimacy by supporting the idea of, and also in the late 18th century as well, the idea that they were for the universality of human rights. They were for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everybody, as the U.S. Declaration of Independence suggests. So anyway, so there was an effort to create, in the area of politics, in the area of statecraft and the writing of constitutions, the idea of universal rights, and that kind of contradicts or that could create a form of a break or against this sort of sociopathic tendency in capitalism. And so antisocial. So sociopathy and antisocial are quasi-synonymous. So you have people who are acting selfishly and focused on their own good. And now Adam Smith created this formulation about the invisible hand and about how individual in the Wealth of Nations, which he later contradicted in or at least partially modified in his later work. But anyway, he thought that, well, by pursuing your individual gain, you would be creating the best social outcome for everybody, and that was false. Okay, but in any case, you have in the more, not so much in the realm of economics, because Smith is usually thought of as an economic, and he is, the founder of modern, or the founder of classical economics, or one of the founders. But anyway, but you have in the area of statecraft and politics, so forth and so on, you have the effort to create ethical or for politicians to attempt to appear to be ethical bulwarks against some of the excesses of capitalism, and the excesses, even though they might at the same time facilitate it by the use of armies and especially beyond the borders of the nation state in other countries in form of imperialism, to entirely facilitate and be the ally, not only ally, but the fundamental enabler of super exploitation of other peoples, via use of military interventions and the installation of puppet regimes and so forth and so on, or client regimes, if not directly puppet regimes, but client regimes that are heavily monitored and threatened with various instruments, both economic and political and military, that all of these things are used outside the boundaries of the nation state by the more powerful nations to, act in what I'm calling a sociopathic way, in an antisocial way, but focusing on another polity, another place. But anyway, but within the context of the nation state, you have the state and the laws of the state, so forth, so on, creating some form of boundaries on the way that capitalists, against, with one against the other, to be able to adjudicate disputes between them, but also then create a generalized sense of legitimacy, a social legitimacy for the order, by creating the sense that there are some rights and that this has been in different countries and in different eras more or less maintained as, again, this a boundary or a hedge or a vertical line against this sociopathic tendency, this tendency to undermine, or ecopathic, you could say, if you're talking about the ecological damages, or biopathological, if socios indicates, relationships with other people, and then also with the non-human environment, the same form of ruthlessness and ruthless pursuit of self-interest without regard for the welfare of the biosphere or the ecosphere, or in which we live. So anyway, so I'm making this distinction to make this is part of the subject of both my blog and then now my vlog, Politics 2100, is an attempt to create a distinction between entirely sociopathic, fascistic politics and the ordinary corrupt neoliberal politics that we find that dominates, for instance, the United States, the neoliberal Democratic Party, the leadership of the Democratic Party, certainly, and penetrating into other parts of the Democratic Party as well, unfortunately. But anyway, to understand, to differentiate between their form of corruption, their form of antisocial behavior, from the kind of antisocial behavior that is fully committed to destruction, to ecocide, so forth and so on. So in effect, the corrupt form of normal sociopathy can have the same effect. For instance, we have in the Biden administration, which makes all kinds of overtures to the public as being a more caring administration. They are speeding up the exploitation of oil and gas on public lands relative to the Trump administration. So while also throwing in some more efforts at being quote unquote green, but in very, very small measure to what is actually needed to transition our economy to a non-fossil basis, and furthermore, even more so, into a circular economy in both energy and material goods. They're not even close to where we need to be in terms of their planning, in terms of their so anyway, the normal sociopathy that I'm trying to explain, or is something that I think is very near to our experience as individuals in a capitalist economy. In other words, that we are encouraged as individuals to exploit all of our strengths and to hide our weaknesses, to exploit our competitive advantages over other people, so forth and so on, and to get ahead of other people by using our competitive advantages to the maximum, and then we can be a quote unquote success, and we can, and then it is a fairly reliable formula to become a success in our economy by doing those things, okay, by acting in this instrumental way in relationship to ourselves, and also in a normal sociopathic way in relationship to other people. And now other people may think it's a hysterical exaggeration to call it sociopathic, but it is antisocial in the sense of that we are not thinking about our bonds with other people, our collective good, so on and so on. We're supposed to focus on our own advancement, and that is our primary commitment, so to speak. And certainly, if you're trying to, raise a family and have enough resources to do that, it certainly seems like it's a formula to do that in a capitalist economy. So it is a normal sociopathy. It's not something that you, in some sense, don't have a choice in certain regards, or you have very little choice in this area. You can do some choices. You have some abilities to make some compromises, but I think it helps to understand, how this operates in order to, and then imagine a better society, a society where we are not compelled as much to undermine the social fabric or our social bonds or the web of life that we live in. That in order to imagine that, we need to understand our current situation. So anyway, so I think that this formulation is pretty robust, at least, or I find it enlightening. I find it interesting, and I think that we try to people in this normal sociopathic range, okay, of choices that we have, we try to maybe reinforce or to atone for our our antisocial acts, so on, by reinforcing our either our religiosity, our political commitments, our belief in a certain cause, our what's supposedly our good deeds, or our donations to a certain cause. So we're always trying to compensate for the general tendency of society to create division, and create not only just division, but to exploitation of the self versus other people, and try to exploit other people's weaknesses or their strengths even, and to claim them for ourselves, so forth and so on. And some of this is the degree to which this is quote unquote inevitable in society is not something that I can necessarily determine. In other words, that there could be even in a more cooperative and circular economy, so forth and so on, with greatly far more egalitarian economy, so forth and so on, where people are appreciated for the variety of goods they bring to society, and are helped in their weaknesses, and in their to develop as full as a human being as they could be, and so forth and so on. There could be this element of quote unquote normal sociopathy that even exists within that framework. But I think so I'm not willing to only attribute it to capitalism, but capitalism, and especially neoliberal capitalism, exploits that in spades, and it magnifies it. And I think this, certainly from this political perspective, I think that it helps for people on the left, I think, in my opinion, to be able to make this differentiation between people who are opponents on the far right, or in the fascist right, in the neo-fascist right, who are wholly committed to evil, you could say, or to destruction, okay, and to the celebration, to encourage, to normalize all forms of sociopathy, including the capitalist sociopathy. And then you have our other opponents who don't recognize this, I think, normal sociopathy, and who think that their professions of goodwill, their claims of being a better kind of person, so forth and so on, sort of make up for both their own self-dealing, and then also definitely the self-dealing of their donors, so that they create this sort of realm of this sanitation project for what I'm calling normal sociopathy, and they are the sanitizers of that. And so I think that is potentially a productive political line of analysis, and we can talk, we can talk in the comments more about that in terms of whether it's productive to think in these terms or to talk in these terms. But then also whether it is productive for us to organize a transformational politics that recognizes this and understands that we need to be more consequently, for a number of reasons, consequently pro-social. So pro-sociality is something that we need more of, and we need not to be ashamed of in having as a feature of our actions and so forth and so on. And that pro-sociality is not there just as a fig leaf or a codpiece or whatever you want to call it, a veil over our fundamental antisocial the real, so to speak, selves that we have, our real, the Germans called innerer Schweinehund, the inner pig dog, But anyway, the inner, you could call him Homo economicus, the economic man, the utility maximizer, the utility monster, so to speak, that supposedly everybody tends toward. So anyway, I think this is a potentially productive line of discussion and thinking. It has ramifications for the climate transition we need to make as a society, and for and addressing a whole bunch of other social and economic problems as well. In any case, please share your thoughts in the comments below. If there's anything in this video that you found worthwhile, please like the video. Please subscribe to Politics 2100 and for notice of further videos that will be coming up. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.